Hello, in this video we will learn how to use the retry policies with Poly, how to set them up, and just a few bits and pieces in the properties and things on how it works. Now, the idea in general is you apply the policy to HttpClient. In this case, we're using Client Factory, and you'll see how it is all done in program.cs. Essentially, this can be very useful if you have some rate-limited API. Say you have a minute-based limit, but then your whole day limit or your whole month limit is perfectly fine. You just sometimes hit that limit in that 1 minute, so you can do a retry every minute, and at some point the resources will free up and it will be able to reach it. And of course, just in general, for sort of more perhaps mission critical things, if there's a restart on the server, on the backend server to which your client is connecting, that might also be a good reason to implement this. So essentially it will make the API call using get async, post async, doesn't matter, from client to which everything is configured. It will get async, then it fails, but it doesn't immediately go here where it ensures success status code. That would be false, that would throw exception, but instead it retries, and if it's successful on the second, on third, or whichever try you want, then it will move forward, it will get the content, and it will all be perfectly fine. So the way you set it up, first of all, you need to install a few things in the NuGet packages. Let's go quickly here to see what's installed. We have the server log here as .NET Core. We have syncs console, just to kind of have better logging in the console and in general, but the main thing is this HTTP resilience. So Microsoft extensions HTTP resilience. This is what enables the Poly feature, or that particular part of the library. So in the program.cs, a relatively straightforward setup. Essentially what we start with, we have this example, we have this weather API client, relatively straightforward example, and we would be calling this base address to get some weather changes, weather data. So we set up this HTTP client, and also let's take a look here. We have weather API, the name. So we will be using this client, and for this client, we will add the specific retry policy here. Now, the way you do it, you refer to that client and you use add resilience handler. You set the policy name, and then this is the actual configuration. So we go into builder and we add retry. Now resiliency does have other things, but essentially it's all about retry today. So we have retry, and then we have HTTP retry strategy options. That is your essentially configuration for the retries. Now you don't need to handle too much, but all of these configuration items here are essentially essential. So the max retry attempts is how many retry attempts you want. Obviously, it can be just a couple if it's a sort of just in case retry, but on more complex solutions, you might have hundreds of retries. And then again, the delay in this case, in this example, it's 1 second, but obviously if you have a minute sort of limit, like mentioned previously, one of the possible scenarios to use something like this, then you would have a minute. You can set whatever time you want, essentially. Of course, it shouldn't be too long, because you run into some possible problems of this program failing, and then it's not even a question of retrying. It won't, if a program shuts down, essentially it won't be retrying again once it comes back on. So just something to remember and something to consider in your architecture. The backoff time, in this case, it's exponential, so it will essentially increase on every retry. So it starts with 1 second, then waits longer and longer and longer and longer, depending on how many retry attempts you have. Use jitter is an interesting feature. This essentially is sort of removes that constant on the retry time. So it won't necessarily be 1 second, then after 2 seconds it might be 2 and a bit, and then it might be 4 and a bit. It sort of moves that time around, so it's not exactly the same every time. It's not exactly the same interval every time. So quite a useful feature, just to kind of fool the API essentially into not thinking that it's perhaps some kind of an attack in some ways, and more importantly, sometimes it can become useful to sort of access those times where the resources are more available in those particular seconds or milliseconds, whatever it may be, however many times you actually retry on whatever intervals you use. So it essentially spreads it around. It's not also constant. The probably most important thing here is this part, and that is what you wanted to handle, what you wanted to try on, or retry rather on. In this case, we have these a sort of if statement, if you will. We will retry if we have request timeout, service unavailable, and gateway timeout. Now, you could retry on unauthorized, you could retry on a bad request, essentially quite a few options you have. And also, this is essentially, let's take a look, let's do accepted, doesn't matter. You can do a few more filters as well. So you just have your basic HTTP thing. So you could even go into content and see what the actual error message is, or do something like that, and only then retry it. So if you hit some rate limiting or something of that nature, then you retry it. Now, another quite useful thing and sort of last thing really is this on retry. So you don't have to do it. This is quite optional, but it's always useful to log, especially if it's not something you expect to happen all that often. You want to log that, well, why it had to be retried, what failed and what went wrong. Other than that, we have this, and then we have this simulator example. This is just example. This is not something you would normally engage in your normal setup. This is just so this code example actually works. And as you can see, we don't have anything else here. Everything else is standard. So the whole setup happens when you add resiliency handler, and then you add retry and you add your options. And with that said, we will conclude this video.